We begin this morning with breaking news right now. Former Secretary of State Colin Powell has died. In a Facebook post, Powell's family wrote, quote, General Colin L. Powell, former U.S. Secretary of State and Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, passed away this morning due to complications from COVID-19. He was fully vaccinated. We want to thank the medical staff at Walter Reed National Medical Center for their caring treatment. We have lost a remarkable and loving husband, father, grandfather, and a great American. He was 84 years old. Powell became the first Black Secretary of State in 2001 when he was appointed to the position by George W. Bush. He attempted to garner support for the Iraq War in a controversial speech before the UN, which was later revealed to be based on faulty intelligence. Now, Powell was also a four-star general and became the first Black chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff in 1989. Here's the latest in a special report from NBC News.
Anna Guthrie and Hoda Kotb.
And good morning, everybody. We come on the air with some sad news. Colin Powell, the former Secretary of State and Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, has died from complications from COVID-19. We want to get right to NBC's chief Washington correspondent, Andrea Mitchell, who has the story. Andrea, what more can you tell us?
Colin Powell has been suffering for several years from multiple myeloma. That, as you know, is a disease, a cancer of the blood and bone. It is a very serious cancer. He was at Walter Reed. I've spoken with Peggy Sofrino, his longtime spokesperson, assistant, longtime colleague, and also to a family member. He had been suffering from this for quite some time, as I had known and as those close to him had known. As you know, he was first in the administration of Ronald Reagan. I first met him when he was Deputy National Security Advisor. He, of course, rose to become Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, had worked under so many presidents and, of course, traveled with him extensively when he was Secretary of State. He has been a long-standing spokesperson, as you know, as well for minority rights and for the African-American community. He is so proud of what he sponsored, the Colin Powell Institute at City College in New York at CCNY. Savannah, you know all of the extraordinary history of this man. I was on the floor of the convention in 2000 in Philadelphia when Republicans booed him because he had been thought of at one point of running for president and decided not to even make that challenge. But he had stood out from his Republican Party even back in 2000 at that convention for speaking up for Black rights and eventually did endorse Barack Obama, as you know.
Andrea, we just got a statement actually from the family of Colin Powell, and they go on to say that he passed away this morning due to complications from COVID-19. They go on to say he was fully vaccinated. They say we've lost a remarkable and loving husband, father, grandfather, and great American.
He was 84 years old, and Andrea just detailed that he had also been suffering from multiple myeloma for many years, but there's no more recognizable figure, perhaps, in American politics than Colin Powell, who rose through the ranks 35 years in the United States military, then becoming the first African-American Secretary of State under former President George W. Bush, as somebody who was a leading voice in politics and also military affairs. I want to get to Kelly O'Donnell, our NBC White House correspondent, who, of course, covered the White House all those years when Colin Powell was there at those key moments in the war on terror after 9/11. Kelly, your thoughts this morning?
What a sad day, Savannah. This is a man who was not only prominent in his field, from soldier to statesman, he was also a very kind and pleasant man to interact with for all of us who had the opportunity to cover Colin Powell and to see his leadership. He rose through the ranks, as Andrea described, and made a huge impact as a figure leading soldiers, as a statesman on the world stage, not without controversy. Of course, he presented the information when he was working for George W. Bush before the UN about weapons of mass destruction in Iraq that proved to not be accurate. And also, he was someone who put forward a huge imprint on the discourse of the time with his calm demeanor and also his experience, intellect, and knowledge. He remained on the national stage for all of these years as someone who could connect to the service members on the ground level as a military leader and to the political and statesman level of diplomacy around the world. A giant figure, one one who will be remembered. And what a shock to lose him in this way with complications of COVID after being fully vaccinated, according to his family. Yeah. Savannah?
He was a trailblazer for sure, born in the Bronx to Jamaican immigrants, rose through the ranks of the Army, first African-American national security advisor in the 80s under President Ronald Reagan, then later first African-American Secretary of State, decorated multiple times, a 4-star general. Colin Powell, a legend in American politics and foreign policy.
Yeah, we're going to have a lot more on this throughout the morning, as well as on MSNBC and NBCNews.com. We will return most of you right now to today. This has been an NBC News special report.
All right, we are back here with Dr. Patel, as we just were a moment ago. But as you've been hearing, we have this breaking news that Colin Powell has passed away at the age of 84. His family says it was complications from COVID, though he was fully vaccinated. Of course, he was the first Black Secretary of State, as well as the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. I'd like to bring back in Dr. Patel now to actually discuss this breaking news here with me. So, Dr. Patel, I think hopefully you can hear me right now. Yeah, there you are. Hi, Dr. Patel. So, yeah. I mean, we're hearing that he was fully vaccinated, 84 years old, though, and did have some of these underlying health conditions. What do you make of this news? And just what do you think about someone passing after being fully vaccinated, keeping in context his age and his other health conditions?
Yeah, Savannah, we're waiting to get, obviously, more details, but a devastating loss nonetheless. Listen, 84 years old, as you mentioned, with some chronic conditions, multiple myeloma, which can cause kind of, Savannah, a condition in the blood that causes the blood to be a little thicker and more prone to things like blood clots. And so there's so many things that can happen just with COVID-19 infection. And I think, as you point out, someone who's fully vaccinated, which raises alarm bells in all of us, I'm sure, but someone who's fully vaccinated but has these underlying chronic conditions really puts him in that category of incredibly high risk. And I would even go further to say immunocompromised. Savannah, it's why we're having this conversation about booster shots, and we'll know more details, I'm sure, shortly. But it could be anything from complications related to, a combination of COVID-19 plus the underlying conditions. Hard to know at this point in time. It's rare, though. I will say this. It's so devastating to see someone that I think is a global public figure like this. It's going to raise a lot of questions and awareness. But my first point would be he does have a lot of those criteria for someone incredibly vulnerable, even in a breakthrough infection, which is potentially what could have happened, to have these complications resulting in rare, but resulting in death.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, Dr. Patel, we do not know which shot Mr. Powell had received. Right. We do not know if he had potentially had that booster shot. But let's just talk about the fact that he is in that age group specifically for, let's just say, the Pfizer vaccine. We do not know, again, I want to be clear, if that's the shot that he received. But just since that's the one that we have booster guidance on right now at that 65 plus, 84 years old with these other health issues, what do you say about boosters there?
Absolutely. Look, I'm going to be honest, Savannah, after seeing last week's data presented by Israel in front of the FDA Advisory Committee, I have grown of the kind of not just opinion, but the medical science supports that everyone is going to need boosters, but especially above the age of 65. And if you're under 65, people with chronic conditions, multiple myeloma would be one of them, where if you're under 65 and you have a condition like that, I would absolutely implore you to talk about whether you should get a booster. Pfizer recipients can get one today. Moderna's and J&J's, as we've talked about, still have to wait some more days. But I think today's going to raise a lot of emotional consciousness. And Savannah, that's a good thing. If people are listening and they're concerned, do not panic. But it's good to have a dialogue and try to get in touch with your doctor's office or somebody you know that can answer some of these questions.
Absolutely. And Dr. Patel, you mentioned this a little bit ago in my first question to you, but can you tell us a little bit more, just generally speaking, what General Powell's health conditions were?
Yeah. So, I know publicly you just heard Andrea Mitchell talk about something we've all known about, multiple myeloma, which is a blood and kind of a bone marrow related disorder. It's something that is actually more common than people realize, especially in older men and women, more predisposed into older men. Think of it as your bone marrow not necessarily making blood cells. This is where in your body you make red blood cells, white blood cells, a number of the things that travel in your blood. And through different signals, multiple myeloma results in kind of abnormal kind of bone marrow behavior that makes people, it's treatable with cancer, bone marrow transplant. There's a number of things that we can do in those conditions. And by all intents and purposes, Colin Powell had an active lifestyle. So he was in what I would have proposed was a recovery phase. But it's still a chronic condition that sets you up for having these other complications. So the combination of a condition like multiple myeloma and COVID-19, even if he was not, it sounds like it was complications. So it makes it sound, Savannah, like he had COVID-19 at some point in the past. It's not clear. But those combinations can create a setup for complications like organ failure, blood clots, a number of things that can really honestly lead to hospitalization and unfortunately death. But this is just another reminder, just when I feel like the holiday season's coming up and we're really getting a handle on COVID, it's a reminder that it's very real, it's present, and it can affect anyone, and especially older patients.
Yeah, and Dr. Patel, you just touched on what I want to ask you next, which was that specific language of complications from COVID-19. Walk us through what that might mean.
Right. So complications of COVID-19 implies that it's not necessarily the acute phase of the illness or that at the acute part of the illness, meaning the immediate part of the illness kind of had been dealt with or wasn't so bad. And yet COVID-19, as we've talked about now, Savannah, can linger for weeks and months. We would call it long COVID, but we see effects. I see patients months out that are still having problems with breathing, problems with their blood, problems with their joints. So it sounds like this might be complications, meaning some time since the initial infection, not clear when, but those complications, what we're calling either long COVID or even some of the short-term after hospitalization issues, those can continue to be incredibly serious. One of the most common ones, by the way, is something that gets a lot of attention, inflammation of the heart, myocarditis. We've talked about that because it can be a side effect, rarely, of vaccines, but we see it a lot more. I see it in patients who have had COVID, and we can see it for weeks out. So that's the type of example of what could have happened, just given his condition and honestly how sudden it appears, because we hadn't heard about him being hospitalized. We'll know soon more. It could have been a sudden cardiac event. There are a number of things that could happen quickly, swiftly, and suddenly. But again, I want to stress, not very common in COVID patients, but also remember his age and his underlying conditions put him at an incredibly frail and high-risk population, despite how active and amazingly interactive he always has been. It's still a devastating loss nonetheless, and
absolutely
a humble reminder of the virus that we're facing.
Yeah, and I think you're so right. I mean, you hear 84 and you do think something frail, you know, a word like that comes to mind, but that's not at all how you would think of General Powell. So, I mean, it just is a shock. Let's just talk quickly about the importance of vaccination, given that we do know that he was fully vaccinated and he passed away. I mean, just remind people what this vaccine does in terms of lowering the risk of death.
Absolutely. I mean, any of the three vaccines, but again, not knowing which one he got, but any of the three available vaccines lowers the risk of death to almost zero. So the fact that we're talking about someone who had complications and then died, again, Savannah, it puts us in literally less than 0.0001% chance. And I mean, that is such a small chance. But again, a reminder, it's possible. And we're still trying to piece together, was this a breakthrough infection? Did he have the infection before he got vaccinated, Savannah? And these are complications months out. All of those things are still up to be answered. However, again, the vaccines, literally, as you remind us, have an almost 100% possible effectiveness to prevent death. So we just do not see this in fully vaccinated people, with the exception, almost all of us that have seen deaths in patients who have been vaccinated, they have all almost unanimously had these really underlying conditions. And I think that's why it was appropriate to highlight his multiple myeloma and multiple myeloma and likely some other chronic conditions, Savannah, all together adding to a really just someone, again, that is at a higher risk. But for anybody listening, I think everybody is probably sitting up in their seat and saying, could that be me? Still very rare, but it's why I think boosters need to be discussed. And if you are a Moderna or J&J recipient, I still think it's worth having that conversation, because I know many immunocompromised patients we're helping to try to facilitate what they can do to get a booster in the absence of the official guidance today.
Absolutely. Dr. Kavita Patel, thank you so much for walking us through this breaking news. This is not what we had planned this morning when we knew you were joining us, but thank you for helping us make sense of it all. Again, if you're just joining us, we have breaking news, which is that General Colin Powell has passed away at the age of 84, the first Black Secretary of State and the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. His family says it was due to complications from COVID-19, and we will continue to update you on this story throughout the morning. But right now, I believe we are going to go to Bill Cairns with the check on our morning news now weather. Hi, Bill.
Hey, good morning. And as we go and take a look at what's happening now in the West, we are transitioning from our fire season now to our rainy season and snow season in some cases. This is one of the pictures at the high elevations. This is from a web camera on Interstate 80. You can see the roads are covered with snow. You get some wet, heavy snow. You look at the trees on the sides are covered. So, yeah, it's that time of year. And over the weekend, it's kind of one of those silly games that they have in Colorado. Which ski resort can open first? And it doesn't really mean much, but they get, they get the banner, I guess. So Colorado ski season is here. This is Arapahoe Basin. They're often one of the first ones to open, but that was the official first chair that went yesterday in Colorado. And here's that storm. It's located almost over the top of Reno right now. This will be a slow mover. It will bring some snow to the high elevations in Idaho, also Wyoming, and portions of northern Utah. This one won't hit Colorado too much, but it will be moving through. So here's kind of the timing on this. Temperatures will be much below normal, too. It'll be a chilly rain in Salt Lake City, but the higher elevations outside the city will get some snow as we go throughout this evening. The storm will spin itself through areas of Wyoming. Casper could get a decent amount of snow and then just rain as it heads out into the plains. So what does this all mean? It means a good dose of rain, Northern California, so we're happy about that. With the fire season and the drought, we'll take whatever we can get. And there's that snow primarily areas of northern Utah and also into Wyoming. Again, snow will be about 4,000 feet or higher, so you really have to be going through the mountain passes if you're going to be having problems driving. And how about the middle of the country? It cooled off, and now it's warmed right back up. Temperatures the same today in Minneapolis as it'll be in San Antonio. It's almost 77 degrees everywhere. St. Louis and Dallas included, and even New Orleans. Popular number today in the middle of the country. It's a chilly morning in the Northeast. It'll be a decent afternoon with highs near 60 degrees from Boston to Philly to New York. D.C. not bad at 66. And then even the Northeast begins to warm up tomorrow, Savannah, and still very warm in areas from Texas up to St. Louis. So overall, pretty quiet weather pattern. And for those diehard skiers, you have at least one place to go.
All right. Well, that's some good news for some people. All right, Bill Cairns, thank you so much. Joining us now is Colonel Jack Jacobs. He's an NBC News military analyst and retired U.S. Army and Medal of Honor recipient. Always great to see you, Colonel. Thank you so much for joining us on this breaking news this morning. Of course, we're discussing the fact that former Secretary of State Colin Powell has passed away at the age of 84. He was the first Black Secretary of State and obviously leaves behind such a legacy, which is what I'm hoping to discuss with you, Colonel. Just first, tell me the impact that this has here, and tell me what you're thinking right now.
Well, for those of us who knew him, and I met him 45 years ago when I was a battalion executive officer at Fort Ord, California. For people who knew him, just meeting him one time was enough to solidify in your mind what a great guy he really was. He was a terrific soldier. And a terrific diplomat while being a soldier. He was calm, thoughtful, persuasive. He convinced people to think clearly, which is often very difficult to do in trying circumstances. He was always calm. And the kinds of things, attitudes that he projected were pervasive. He influenced, as a mentor, several generations of people in uniform, and he will be sadly missed.
Absolutely. He most certainly will be. And what a way to remember him, a terrific soldier and a terrific diplomat. You know, Colonel, I think when somebody hears age 84, they think about somebody who was certainly less active than General Powell was. I mean, tell us about his recent years and what he's still been doing, the work that he's been doing, and how much of a shock this is going to come.
Well, he keeps teaching, and he kept teaching and kept writing, kept working with with charitable organizations. He was really, you thought he was unstoppable. He seemed, I just saw him, the last time I saw him, I think was last year. He still seemed last year, when he was 83, the same as he seemed 45 years ago when I had first met him. And that's why he seemed he was going to last forever. But his legacy will. And more over time will come out about what an influential person he was, not just when he was a younger soldier, but when he got older and he was more influential in the corridors of power, not just among people who were in uniform, but among people who were not. He was busy all the time, and he always took time out, not for me, but for anybody. He gave his advice freely and was always available to people who needed him.
Yeah, Colonel, I know you mentioned that the first time you met him, I think you said was 45 years ago. Just tell me some of the specific things that you remember as someone who's actually met General Powell.
Well, he was a graduate of City College in New York, and my battalion commander at the time was also a graduate of City College in New York and knew him extremely well when, in the Army and when they were at school. I can tell you this about Colin Powell. He was a heck of a poker player. He used to come out from time to time for a visit, and as unstoppable as he was also unbeatable in poker. He was extremely difficult to deal with, and you played poker with him at your enormous risk. He did, in fact, have a poker face, and you couldn't get anything by him. He was he thought about a lot of things like a chess player thinks. I think like a professional bridge player thinks. He thought several moves ahead. He was not just thinking in this moment. He frequently rolled the tape forward, would say things like, what can go wrong? He'd always ask that question and taught lots of us to ask that question, which stood us in good stead in and out of uniform. But he always thought several moves ahead and was constantly thinking about how he could accomplish the mission with the smallest possible force and to get it right now because he thought about what was going to happen in the future.
Absolutely. I think there's such an impact in terms of your legacy when you are the first of anything. And he was, of course, the first Black Secretary of State. What do you think the lasting impact is of that?
I think it's difficult to think about that. I think one never, certainly if you were in uniform and you knew Colin Powell, you never thought of him as a black colonel or a black general. You thought of him as Colin Powell, a smart guy. And for those of us who knew him, that his legacy was not his color. His legacy was his intelligence, how he taught people who were coming up through the ranks how to act and how to think. That's how you thought about him as the smart guy in the room and not as any other thing except the smart guy.
Yeah. Smart guy, and according to you, great poker player. Sounds like maybe you lost some money to him over the years. Is that right, Colonel?
I did indeed, and the nicest guy in the world.
What an incredible way to remember him. Thank you so much for sharing your personal memories and just talking us through some of this legacy here. Thank you so much for joining us. Colonel Jack Jacobs, so great to have you with us today. Breaking news right now. Former Secretary of State Colin Powell has died. In a Facebook post, Powell's family wrote, quote, General Colin L. Powell, former U.S. Secretary of State and Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, passed away this morning due to complications from COVID-19. He was fully vaccinated. We want to thank the medical staff at Walter Reed National Medical Center for their caring treatment. We have lost a remarkable and loving husband, father, grandfather, and a great American. He was 84 years old, and Powell became the first Black Secretary of State in 2001 when he was appointed to the position by George W. Bush. He attempted to garner support for the Iraq War in a controversial speech before the UN, which was later revealed to be based on faulty intelligence. Powell was also a four-star general and became the first Black chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff in 1989. We will continue to stay on this story this morning for you. Let's now take a look at what else is making news around the world this morning. Ali Aruzzi is back with us this hour from London. Hi, Ali. Good morning.
Morning again, Savannah. Well, at least 22 people have been killed in the southern Indian state of Kerala after torrential rain caused landslides that swept through villages and blocked roads. Videos show people wading through chest-deep water to rescue passengers trapped on a bus that was partially submerged. The death toll in Kerala is expected to rise. Romans are voting in a runoff election to see who the capital's next mayor will be. They have a choice between a center-right and a center-left candidate as tensions spike over the country's Green Pass that mandates workers be double jabbed or show a negative COVID-19 test. And finally, the flame for the Beijing 2020 Olympics was lit this morning in Greece's ancient Olympia. Beijing will be the first city to host both the Summer Games and the Winter Games. However, protests and calls for a boycott over Beijing's human rights record marred the event. And those are your headlines, Savannah.
All right, Ali, thank you so much. We'll see you in a bit. Also, right now, back to our breaking news and the fact that General Colin Powell has passed away at the age of 84. We now have a statement from former President George W. Bush and his wife, Laura. Here's what it reads. Laura and I are deeply saddened by the death of Colin Powell. He was a great public servant. Starting with his time as a soldier during Vietnam, many presidents relied on General Powell's counsel and experience. He was National Security Advisor under President Reagan, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff under my father and President Clinton, and Secretary of State during my administration. He was such a favorite of presidents that he earned the Presidential Medal of Freedom twice. He was highly respected at home and abroad, and most important, Colin was a family man and a friend. Laura and I send Alma and their children our sincere condolences as they remember the life of a great man. We will continue remembering the life of this great man here on Morning News Now this morning. Of course, right now, we only have the little bit of information that was posted by his family on their Facebook page that he passed away from complications of COVID-19 this morning at age 84. This morning, the TV show America's Got Talent has temporarily shut down production on a new extreme version of its show after a terrifying accident involving a contestant. NBC News correspondent Emily Aketa joins us now from Los Angeles with this story. Hi, Emily. Good morning.
Savannah, good morning. The escape artist who was badly injured has made a living pulling off extreme stunts, but this one went horribly wrong, and a camera captured the whole thing as it unfolded. We want to warn some of this video may be disturbing to watch. This morning, a daredevil known for leaving viewers on the edge of their seats with stunts like this one is fighting for his life after his latest attempt.
We need a rescue and a helicopter.
It happened on a set in Georgia for an upcoming spinoff of America's Got Talent, America's Got Talent Extreme, which promises jaw-dropping acts of enormous scale. Judge Simon Cowell telling music entertainment show The Buzz last month.
Literally a more extreme version with stunts and everything.
But one of those stunts landed Jonathan Goodwin in the hospital. In this video obtained by TMZ but not independently verified by NBC News, you can see Goodwin hanging in midair as two cars hurtled towards him. According to TMZ, Goodwin's harness was supposed to unhook before the cars collided into him, similar to this stunt he performed in 2013. But on Thursday, something went wrong, and Goodwin was allegedly crushed by the pair of exploding cars before falling to the ground.
He's posturing with a neuro injury.
Chilling 911 audio we obtained from The Sun but have not confirmed details the seriousness of the accident.
He fell about 40 feet, missed the airbag, landed on his head.
A spokesperson for America's Got Talent, which airs on NBC, writing, he was responsive and was immediately taken to the hospital, adding, our thoughts and prayers go out to him and his family. Earlier this month, the British escape artist showing off equipment for the stunt, writing cranes and cars and explosives, oh my. Just days before the rehearsal, Goodwin telling fans, let's do this. But several years ago, he admitted he's in a very dangerous line of work.
So many things that can go wrong, and if any single one of them is wrong, then I could get badly hurt or even killed.
Stunt work can certainly be dangerous, but deaths in the field are fairly uncommon. We saw at least 2 in 2017 between The Walking Dead and Deadpool 2. Data regarding injuries on sets is a bit murkier. I can tell you America's Got Talent Extreme says it is continuing to pause filming to focus on the crew's well-being. Savannah.
All right, Emily. Wow, some of those details are tough to hear. Thank you so much. Former Secretary of State Colin Powell has died. In a Facebook post, Powell's family wrote, quote, General Colin L. Powell, former U.S. Secretary of State and chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, passed away this morning due to complications from COVID-19. He was fully vaccinated. We want to thank the medical staff at Walter Reed National Medical Center for their caring treatment. We have lost a remarkable and loving husband, father, grandfather, and a great American. He was 84 years old, and Powell became the first Black Secretary of State in 2001 when he was appointed to the position by George W. Bush. He attempted to garner support for the Iraq War in a controversial speech before the UN, which was later revealed to be based on faulty intelligence. Powell was also a 4-star general and became the first Black chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff in 1989. And I do want to read a statement that we now have from former President George W. Bush. There you see it on your screen. It reads, Laura and I are deeply saddened by the death of Colin Powell. He was a great public servant, starting with his time as a soldier during Vietnam. Many presidents relied on General Powell's counsel and experience. He was National Security Advisor under President Reagan, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff under my father and President Clinton, and Secretary of State during my administration. He was such a favorite of presidents that he earned the Presidential Medal of Freedom twice. He was highly respected at home and abroad. And most important, Colin was a family man and a friend. Laura and I send Alma and their children our sincere condolences as they remember the life of a great man. We have been remembering him here on Morning News Now this morning. We had Colonel Jack Jacobs with us earlier, who also told us that he was a fierce poker player. He'd taken much money from him over the years, but he also just said what a great person he was and how he was someone that everyone went to for advice. A 56-year-old Chinese woman has become a surprise social media star after she posted candid and personal videos about her life during her solo travels across China. NBC News correspondent Janice Mackey-Freyer joined the unlikely icon on her journey of self-discovery.
There's a ritual to it now. The parking lots and campsites, the roof tent and meals alone. And Su Min has never been happier. Since setting out nearly a year ago on a solo road trip around China, an awakening, she calls it, having spent most of her life in one place, doing what was expected of her as a wife, a mother, and grandmother. This time it's for me, she says. I came out to live for myself. She's traveled 25,000 miles so far, from beaches to mountaintops, sort of like a Chinese version of the movie Eat, Pray, Love.
I want to go someplace where I can marvel at something.
It was when Sue, who's 56, started posting videos of her road trip to Chinese TikTok that her journey took a very big turn. Because the videos went viral. Not so much for the scenery and selfies, but the intimate details Sue began to reveal about herself and the reasons for her journey. Her abusive marriage, unhappiness at middle age, the thrill of newfound freedom. She says the day she left, her husband told her, if you go, just have fun and don't come back. Sue is an internet sensation now. She has 1.5 million followers on social media who tell her how painfully familiar her story feels to them. You want to be brave like me? You will be, she says. Her popularity is a challenge to traditional gender roles here, especially among her generation. I hooked up with Su Min in Yunnan province, in her crammed hatchback driving north into the mountains toward the Tibetan plateau. She studied travel blogger videos to learn how to camp and save money. I ask her if she ever feels lonely on the road. The scenery is so good, she says. There's no time to be lonely. That's also because people often just show up to join her. They bring her food and visit. Inspired by this former factory worker turned accidental feminist icon. I'm just an ordinary Chinese woman, she says. I really didn't expect that I could go this far. Already, Sue has starred in documentaries and fashion ads. She's even getting sponsorships.
So, if this was the movie, what happens next?
After this, if I can go back to a happy home, that should be a perfect ending, she says, adding she doesn't want the stigma of a divorce. But that's all down the road. For now, Sue Min has a country to see and a life to discover. I'm Janice Mackey-Frere in Yunnan, China.
And that does it for this hour of Morning News Now, but the news continues right now.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.